Alright, this is Block 9, the second set of notes, Face Off. What defined the two sides as the violence began of the Civil War? Looking at a chart of the war-making powers of both sides, the war-making material, everything favored the United States, the North, over the South, the Confederate States. All important material factors favored the North. The North had a much higher population, 22 million people, works out to about 4.4 million men of military age. The South had a total population of 9 million, but of those 9 million, 3.5 million were slaves, and that works out to about 1.1 million men of white military age. So just if both sides could muster every man they could to fight a battle, the North would have a 4-to-1 advantage. Factory output. 80% of all the nation's factories were in the North. And once these factories got rolling on a war footing by 1862, the North and the Northern soldiers, Union soldiers, always had enough of everything. Enough food, enough supplies, enough material, enough weapons, enough ammunition. While the Confederacy did amazing things in trying to create an industrial base during the war, the South was often short of manufactured supplies like shoes and uniforms, medicine, blankets, tents, ammunition, the stuff of modern war. The South counts on trading cotton in Europe in exchange for manufactured goods. How you got this stuff from place to place and to the battlefield was a major division. The North had 20,000 miles of highly interconnected track of railroad track. They connected all the major towns and cities. They ran into farmland in the country. They ran on the same gauge. That means the railroad tracks in Boston were pretty much the same width as they were in Cleveland, as they were in Chicago, as they were in Philadelphia. So a train could go from track to track to track easily. The South had only about 10,000 miles of railroads, but even those 10,000 miles of railroads did not necessarily go from city to city. They went from cotton-producing areas to cities, and not in between cities itself. Because they did not go in between cities, the gauges were very often different. That to take a train from one, it was impossible to take a train, one train from one end of the Confederacy to the other. On the other hand, in the North, you could easily take a train from the most important western city, Chicago, to the East Coast, many different ways, many different times, on many different tracks. The North, as we've seen before, was also crisscrossed by canals that made the transportation of large, bulky supplies like food a lot easier. It was not only in industrial goods and manufacturing that the North had an advantage. Even though we think of the South as the agricultural section of the country, the North was still mostly agricultural in 1860. The North puts out about twice as much crop output as the South. For every ton of agricultural output of the South, the North puts out 2 tons. The North produced more food, while the South's agricultural economy is based on the 2 cash crops of tobacco and cotton. And the South has an agricultural dilemma in 1860. If they focus on producing cotton, there cannot be enough food to feed the people. But if they produce food, there cannot be enough cotton to trade for the things they need to fight the war. So Southern farmers are faced with a terrible dilemma. Produce food and feed the army, but then there's not going to be anything to trade for needed supplies. But if you grow the stuff that you can trade for needed supplies, you're going to have trouble having enough food to feed the soldiers. Every material advantage lay with the North. The North had a government set up. The North had a navy. The North had a transportation system. The North had factories. The North produced 97% of the weapons in the country in 1860. So the question sometimes almost looks like, not that why did the North win, but what the hell took them so long? And there was a couple reasons for that, and that's number 2, military skill. In military skill, the South dominates. More than half of America's officers were Southern, and the vast majority of them, upon the secession of their states, resigned their commissions and went home to serve their states and then the South. Of the United States' military schools, 7 of them are in the South. While the North eventually produces competent and good generals, most historical opinion has put Southern generals at much better than their Northern counterparts. General Jackson in the South and General Lee in the South, General Longstreet in the South are generally considered to be better than any of the great generals that the North produced. But it was more than just the generals. The average, Northern soldier were city men who worked in factories. They had never held or fired a gun in their life. In the South, growing up on farms and plantations with chivalry and hunting, guns and horses were a way of life in the South. And there was a military ethos, a military bearing that kind of permeated through Southern society as well. Southerners in general are better horsemen than their counterparts in the North, and that meant that throughout the course of the war, Southern cavalry ran rings around the cavalry that the Union could put into the field. And it's not until a technological advantage is given to the Northern cavalry that they can hold their own on a battlefield, that the Southern cavalry commanders become famous. Jeb Stuart, Nathan Bedford Forrest become famous for their exploits during the war. The North had a more difficult time in kind of what it had to do to win the war. The North's war goal was much more difficult. The North had to conquer and subdue the entire South. That Northern soldiers had to start in the North and attack and invade the Southern states. They had to actually march and conquer land. That meant that their lines of communication and their lines of supply would be longer. Factories in Pennsylvania, their stuff would have to be transported into the South to keep the war going. They would have to deal with hostile local populations that Northerners in Virginia and Northerners in Tennessee and Northerners in Georgia could not expect to be helped out by the civilian population. And once they were down there, they would have to rely on the primitive transportation system that the South had anyway. The South, on the other hand, only had to play defense and hold the North off long enough for people in the North to say, ugh, this war is not worth fighting. The South only had to play defense, prevent the North from invading, and they would win the war. In terms of morale and why people fought, the North has a much more difficult time. President Lincoln and the organs of opinion in the North somehow had to convince its citizen that the Union was worth defending and the war was worth fighting. Unionism is an abstract concept. Why should there be a union between Iowa and Arkansas? Emotional reasons, political reasons, realistic reasons? Why should a boy from New Hampshire fight to keep Mississippi in the Union? Many Northerners are so disgusted by the South in the first place that their attitude is just let them go, who cares? They said if we bring them back into the Union, we're just going to have the same problems all over again. And through 1864, 1861, 1862, 1863, 1864, there is by no means a unified thought that this war was worth fighting. When the military, when the progress of the military was going good, people were like, yeah, the war is worth it. But when losses started to mount and victory was not obtained quickly, a lot of people in the North said, this war is not worth fighting, it's not worth the casualties, let them go. And that doesn't change until late 1864. Do not imagine that everybody in the North was behind President Lincoln's project here of keeping the Union together by force. Millions were not. The South's job politically is a lot easier. Defend your home. Somebody is invading your home. It's your farm, your town, your house that's going to be attacked. Your way of life, your culture is under attack from the North. All the South wants is to be left alone. They have no desire to challenge the North. They have no desire to conquer the North. Southern armies are not going to be invading Kentucky, trying to get Kentucky into the Confederacy. Southern armies are not going to be invading, New Jersey, trying to get New Jersey into the Confederacy. All the South wants to do, in their minds, and this is a lot easier to sell to people, is to just be left the hell alone. The South also believed that it had a secret weapon, and their secret weapon was cotton. Now, I want to explain what a blockade is in case you do not know. This is a pretty good map of it. A blockade is a legal term meaning to prevent imports and to prevent commerce from taking place. Okay? One of the things that the South knew the North would do was take their navy and blockade the southern coast. Use their navy to prevent southern ships from leaving the South and to prevent other ships from coming into the South. Alright, so that's called a blockade. The South knew that one of the first things the Union would try to do was use their navy to block the southern coast, prevent ships from going in and out. But here's what the South is counting on. The South knows that the manufacturing societies in the world, in the North, but especially in Britain and France, that the manufacturing societies of the world needed their cotton. And they needed their cotton so much that factory owners in the North would demand that Lincoln give up so they could get their cotton again, but more importantly, the South believed that the fact that they grew so much cotton meant that Britain and France would demand that the Union stop the blockade. This is so important to understand. The South believed in their heart of hearts that Britain and France needed their cotton so much that they would tell the Union, either stop the blockade or we will stop it for you. So if Britain says to the Union, cancel the blockade, and Lincoln says no, the South believes that Britain and France will declare war on the United States, break the blockade, and help the South become independent. That is the big diplomatic fact of the South. We need to understand that. The South believed that cotton was so important that Britain and France would break the blockade and declare war on the Union for that good, for that cotton. They based their entire diplomatic efforts on that fact. So as we get ready to do the actual fighting, the North has every material advantage. The South has important military advantages. And because those advantages kind of canceled each other out, that's why you get 4 years of terrible bloody warfare. But in 1861, both sides believed that the war would be quick, the war would be easy. The South believed that the Yankees couldn't fight and would run away screaming the first time they encountered Southern soldiers. The Northerners believed that the Southerners were, cowards dependent on slaves, and as soon as their force could be brought to bear, they would run away. Both sides, in 1861, as both sides are gathering armies, both sides expect the war to be over by Christmas. It was not going to happen that way.